Welcome to MetaPod, the podcast where we discuss operational execs and organizations that make and move stuff, and our common headaches, digital transformation, the forever labor shortage, and doing more with less. And now, the host of MetaPod, Ron Crabtree.
It's Ron Crabtree here, back with another episode of MetaPod, and I've got a really wonderful guest who's going to be joining us here today to talk about those three common challenges that manufacturers, people involved with tangible goods at all sizes and levels, all industries face these three common challenges around the forever labor shortage, particularly in North America and most of the Western world. Digitization, digital transformation of work. There's so much pressure around what's AI and how do we go to the next level leveraging tools like AI, which is just a tiny slice of the big picture in terms of digitization. And then finally just doing more with less of resources, supply chain, facilities, so on and so forth. There's endless pressure to do more with less. So Pavan, and I always butcher his last name, so I'm gonna put Muzumdar, right? Muzumdar? Is that close enough?
Bummer. Yeah.
Yeah, I apologize. I always go by Pavan so I can keep it straight. I've actually known Pavan for, golly, at least 10 years now. He's been involved with an Automation Alley organization. He's going to talk more about himself in a second. But I remember back when I was helping organize programs for the Detroit ASCM Apex chapter, golly, 10 years ago, I really saw Pavan as being a thought leader around this thing we were calling Industry 4.0 at that point, which is already beginning to see, end of its life cycle. And Pavan came in and did just a really good job of, this emerging body of knowledge 10 years ago and really opened up my mind to a lot of cool things. And he'll be talking about him in a second. But so if you're really looking at, AI, additive manufacturing, what are those practical tools we keep thinking about from a digitization perspective? And this episode would really be for you if you're a manufacturer struggling with talent shortages, how technology could help this, if you're leading digital transformation, but you need ideas and examples of how to do it, looking for ways to maximize efficiency, reduce waste, build resilience in your operations. Or if you're just plain curious, like he's going to talk a little bit about Project Diamond and how that helps small and mid-sized current companies compete on a global scale. So with that, Bon, share a little bit about you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Ron, for that wonderful introduction. So, keep it very brief. So, I started my career as an engineer in electronics, and then electrical engineering. After that, focusing really on semiconductors. That was my beginning. That was my introduction to the tech world. And then made a move into computer science. Really, that was because when I graduated in the master's degree, there weren't any jobs in hardware and VLSI. And so I said, hey, what's something that I can do that's sort of next, a lane over, if you will. And I got into computer science. So I had this electronics background. I've gone into computer science. I was very fortunate to work for a wonderful company called Cambridge Technology Partners in the early and mid 90s. And in that company, what we did was we basically solved large problems for large companies, and really they were very strategic. So some of the companies I worked for back then was AT&T, their customer service system, Memorial Sloan Kettering that was doing some very interesting work in disease information management, and then JP Morgan also in their back office operations. And really, the reason to say that is because I was fortunate enough to get a great experience in many different problem areas where it was humans and technology working together. And that sort of became my mantra moving forward. Then moved into family-owned businesses that were owned by my in-laws at the time, and went from this large company organization to very small businesses, and kind of got a completely different view of the world. I saw small businesses as being very nimble, very agile, but sometimes lacking in the structure and lacking in maybe the resources for sure. If you work with any small manufacturer today, one of the things in addition to talent, they'll basically say capital. Capital and talent are usually the two things we find all the time. And the reason for that is manufacturing is both a capital intensive and a personnel intensive business. So it's something that I kind of went in. Now we weren't doing any manufacturing, but we were doing distribution. So I learned about that. I learned that, and one of the portfolio companies at the time was a software business. So I got deep into ERP systems and really understood operations from the inside out. few years after that, we happened to divest of one of the companies, and the finance bug caught me, and I never thought of myself as a finance guy, but I was always very curious. And so, I had kind of like this mid-career opportunity, and one way would have been, hey, should I go down this MBA path, which was kind of interesting, and a lot of engineers become MBAs. But then one of my friends who was in the investment management business said, hey, you should probably look at something called the CFA, as Chartered Financial Analyst designation. And so that's the path I went down. And so, again, very fortunate to kind of take my technical background, my business background, and kind of, put that all together. And then, a few years after that, I found myself at the doorstep of Automation Alley after having developed a system called iCube, which encapsulates all these ideas into what I would call a leadership system that helps leaders, be very cohesive, very clear in their approach to running a business. And that's how my journey with Automation Alley started. We went down this path of Industry 4.0, which really helped me, and a lot of the work that I had done kind of just fed into that very naturally, because those challenges that I was observing were essentially coming to fruition in manufacturing. And with the work that I'd done in iCube, it helped me create this model of where the world is going. And then, as you said, 100%, the term Industry 4.0 is now starting to it's already now about 15 years old, but those foundational concepts of digital and physical systems now add into that AI. The foundational concepts stay the same, which is the digitization of pretty much every technology that we see, and what is the impact on personnel management, and human empowerment. And that, I believe, is the future of where artificial intelligence is taking us. And I've heard both sides of the argument, and I think where the world is going to go is very difficult to predict. But the one thing we can control as humans and as participants in this is, what is our role in this? And that's where I focus my effort. I try not to focus on the uncontrollables. I try to focus on, what can I do about this? And that has now shaped our philosophy on artificial intelligence. What can I do about it? And I think there's a lot we can do if we're just deliberate, and we can talk a little bit about that. And that really is where Automation Alley is sort of taking its.
So let me interrupt there, Pavan, if I could, for a second. I was at the Orchestral Optimal Conference last week. Excuse me, Orchestral Optimal Conference down in Houston last week, and we had a guest speaker. We used to run a little company called General Electric years ago, and he was one of the Jack Welch proteges, and he basically, said something that's really important is AI going to take your job? Probably not. People who use AI will take your job. So I found that extremely on point, right? So people without AI are going to get beaten by the people who are leveraging tools like AI and digitization. So that's a quick aside. But you did say, I did want you to take an extra minute that you didn't really plan to do. Tell us a little bit about Automation Alley. How did that get started? What's the charter?
Yeah.
And what's the mission of Automation Alley? I think it's important our audience understands that.
So Automation Alley, for those who don't know, we're already in our 26th year now of operation. It was founded in 1999, actually. And it basically is an organization initially conceived by the then county executive of Oakland County, L. Brooks Patterson, as a mechanism to brand Southeast Michigan as a center of technical excellence. And the context in 1999, if you remember, a little bit of, going back in history, was the internet was taking over everything, and Silicon Valley was basically the where everybody's attention was focused. And the Brooks Patterson at the time said, well, Southeast Michigan, with its automotive capabilities, is as technically advanced as anything. In fact, back in the day, we used to say, cars are computers on wheels. And so he kind of wanted to create this, and oh, by the way, if you heard some of the other things that were going on at the time was, hey, Michigan's a Rust Belt state. Everybody, leave the last person leaving Michigan, turn the lights off. I mean, and he kind of really wanted to push back against that, which he did beautifully, and created Automation Alley. And so that, took about a 10-year cycle to kind of build the brand, and created this foundation that we now enjoy. In 2015, Tom Kelly who is our executive director, and following the first one, Ken Rogers, pivoted the organization. And when I say pivoted, it really built up on the foundation, right? To say we need to talk about what is happening to the factory floor. Because at the time, and we're talking circa 2015, everyone was talking about mobility and everybody was talking about recrafting the product experience in automotive. And no one was talking about, well, but what's happening to where these things are being made? And the factory floor was being radically disrupted by Industry 4.0 forces, which is the digitization of all processes as we know them. And no one around the state seemed to be really paying attention to it. And we said, you know what? Digitization and automation go hand in hand. We should be the organization that talks about this, its impact on manufacturing, the personnel, and the ecosystem. And so we recrafted ourselves in 2015 as the Industry 4.0 Knowledge Center and essentially built that brand that is now sort of, again, it's a little pivot, but we now call ourselves the Digital Transformation Insight Center because it is much more about just Industry 4.0 in manufacturing. It is now fundamentally recrafting our relationship at a personal level with technology. So it has now kind of gone to that level of evolution. And it's been an incredibly fruitful 10 years of just kind of being able to be that source for manufacturers. And I'll just give you one metric before stop. One is when we started, we had a few hundred manufacturers as our members. Today we have over 4,000 members. Most of them are small manufacturers across the state of Michigan. So we rebranded. We're not just an Oakland County entity anymore. We are now a Michigan-wide entity, and we're in the process of recrafting again our U.S. Center for Advanced Manufacturing, which will be a national organization, because America doesn't stop at Michigan's borders, right? This is a national imperative that we really need to understand of how do we bring manufacturing back to the United States and make it much more relevant. So that is essentially the historical arc of Automation Alley.
Well, the nonprofit organization, are people who live outside or companies outside Michigan allowed to join?
So we are working on a mechanism for us to be able to do that right now.
Okay.
That is through through what we're calling the U.S. Center for Advanced Manufacturing for that exact purpose. Now we are always welcoming of any companies that would so great question. Anybody who's outside of Michigan can join as a paying member. However, we have a program called the Essential Membership. Any small manufacturer in the state of Michigan gets an essential membership free of charge, courtesy the state of Michigan. That is not available to non
Got it.
companies.
Got it.
But if you're a technology company wishing to bring your technology into Michigan and figure out how to make our ecosystem better, absolutely. Everybody's under the tent. And the only thing is we can't subsidize that membership because of obvious reasons. And so, but obvious, yes, but it's, we have many members that are not Michigan companies that are our members, but they're paying members through our different levels that we work with.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I'm a big fan, always have been, of you and the Automation Alley folks. So I'm certainly, happy for the audience to know more about that. So let's pivot and get back to some blocking and tackling here. What I'm interested in next here, Pavan, is, what are the three key areas you think small, medium-sized manufacturers, people involved with tangible goods, no matter where they are, what would be three key areas you think that they should be diagnosing, assessing? What are the three areas you're looking at? Why do we look at these? How do we measure them? How do we determine the nature of the gap we probably or may face? And talk about that for 5 or 10 minutes. And then we're going to pivot and say, let's assume the audience has those issues. Then we'll talk about the practical advice. What do you do?
Yeah.
Well,
So
it's not easy to Google, right? To go fix these kinds of
that's a great question. And so in these 10 years or so that we've really dug down into Industry 4.0, what we've uncovered is Industry 4.0 is a duality. And by the way, Industry 4.0 and its next evolution, which is AI, it's all part of the same continuum because AI, from our perspective, is just one of those elements, one of those technology areas of Industry 4.0. So it's not like it's a separate thing. But what became very obvious is that Industry 4.0, which is the confluence of digital and physical systems, requires a duality in thinking. And some examples of that is, in a digital world, your product, let me back up for a second. In a physical world, your product is tangible. Your product is typically made serially. Your product is typically, you value throughput. In the digital world, your product is intangible. It's usually a service or a digital product. It isn't necessarily produced serially because there's massive parallelization. And it's not necessarily something that you would want to be static. You need it to be changing. Because if you go to a website day in and day out and nothing changes on the website, by the third day, you're done. You're not going to that website anymore. But that's not the same with the physical product. In ownership models in physical products are different. Ownership models in physical products tend to be exclusive. In digital products, they're shared. If I'm the owner of my car, yes, I might be able to rent it out or do things like that, but it's my car. I'm the person on the record. I'm the title. There's only one title holder, and it's either an entity or an individual. But if I have a movie and I'm Netflix, I can have 1,000, 1,000,000 people watching that movie at the same time. Which means if I'm monetizing my product, there's a serial monetization, one-time monetization, then there's massive parallelization. So all of these things essentially fed into our understanding of, we need to start thinking. And from a capital perspective, in the physical product, in the physical world, we value capital investments. If you look at a manufacturer, they say, hey, tell me about your business. One of the first things they'll tell you is what they do and what they own in terms of how they do that work. Hey, I'm a casting, expert. I'm an injection molding expert. We call these the ings, the machinings, so on. And by the way, here's my capital equipment that I can bring to the table to be able to produce those services. In the digital world, all of those things typically tend to be commoditized because it's the same computer. You don't, if you have the capital, the same GPU, however expensive it is that you buy from NVIDIA, OpenAI buys the same GPU and Claude buys the same GPU. It's the human element that makes the difference. The personnel make the difference. Now, here's the interesting thing. In Industry 4.0 and digital transformation, you don't get a freebie. You are both. It's a duality. So we kind of condense these into three things that every company needs to really understand. Is one, you got to have a culture that is based on learning and improvement. Now, this is not necessarily something that happens naturally in a manufacturing environment, and I'll talk about that in a second. The second thing is you need to look at your finance differently. It's not just about capital investments, which is what I would call NPV analysis. It is option-like thinking also overlaid on top of that, which is being able to experiment, and those experiments create that learning. And then the final thing is the technical capabilities that are aligned and completely in agreement with the mission and the vision of the organization. So it's these three pillars: culture, finance, and technology. And the common element in all of these is a new way to think about your business, which is the human element. Because culture is all about human. Finance is essentially thinking about how do I now invest in the human activity, not necessarily the CapEx, and the technology, which is how do I bring my human capability to say, well, that technology doesn't make a lot of sense, but this one does because it improves my human experience or the outcomes that I'm delivering back to my clients or my customers. So that's the kind of common thread. It's these three pillars, but the X factor is the human in the mix. That's how we kind of categorize,
All right, cool. So as we were getting ready for recording this episode of MetaPod, you had like three different areas that you were going to dive into. So basically, you kind of created a framework here, right?
Yes.
But you talked about the workforce being an area, operations, and then supply chain. Could you tease those out just a little bit so it's practically applied? Drop down one layer to okay, if we're going to talk about workforce, what are we evaluating? What are we looking for?
It's actually very, very simple. It is a can-do attitude and a willingness to learn, because I am not going to be able to bring everything that I need to know in my job day one because the environment in which I work continues to change. And so I need to be able to, I need to be able to bring it. I need to have a workforce that is so flexible and so willing to learn new things. And then as an organization, we need to provide that empowerment. So in the early days of, before I would say pre-chat GPT, I'll give you a great example. Pre-chat GPT, we would often hear, I heard a company saying, you know, I've gone through 22 CNC machinists. I'm having a problem, finding CNC machinists. And my response was, I don't think you have a problem finding CNC machinists. You have a problem retaining the CNC machinists. So something there is going on, and we didn't dig deeper into it. But then it sometimes gets translated into, I can't find someone to do CNC programming, right? It was like both, it's like both things. It's like either I'm not able to do it or they're going somewhere. There's a supply and demand mismatch because sometimes skills are unavailable. Fast forward to a post GPT ChatGPT world, you can now ask ChatGPT to essentially take anybody who has a basic understanding of computer skills and create a customized CNC tutorial to get them started down this path and create that educational piece of it. Will they become as expert as they have to be? Probably not day one, but if they go down this path through the learning that's required, it's just programming. It's like anything else, it's just programming. You can kind of go down this path. But to do that, you need to have that one person who is willing to say, I don't know enough about it today, but I'm going to figure out my path to find the answer. So on the workforce side, that's the one.
All right. So if I could summarize that then, so what we're evaluating, I'm on the board of directors, right? I don't run the manufacturing. I work down in the supply chain. I don't see what's going on the floor. And so it's assessing to what degree we've created an environment within which people have the opportunity to explore and tap into other sources for getting things done, leveraging current technologies. So do we have a gap there? Do we put people out there and just tell them that follow the SOP and shut up and do the work? Or I'm very open to, let's talk about how do we go to the next level and engage them. So to what degree are we doing that? That's what we need to assess.
Yes. And so this is what I was mentioning earlier. In traditional manufacturing, and by the way, for no fault of the way things are today, a mistake was very costly. You create this line, and this line may not necessarily have every single sensor that needs to be there. So you start creating these heuristics, you create SOPs, you create these internal, very specific, manuals to do things. And as soon as that is tuned to the right way, you tell the person, don't change anything, keep it running the way it is. So we've essentially extracted away any kind of experimentation out of the system for good reason. Because if something went wrong,
Make a lot of scrap or break something I can't fix easily.
in fact, you mentioned Jack Welch earlier. Some people don't know, but Jack Welch actually, I think, burnt down a factory in his early career. And in one outcome, he would have been a nobody. But somehow or the other, he found the right mix of leadership, and they said, what are we going to learn from this? And then he went on to a different career, right? So the point, though, is GE as an organization had the wherewithal to sustain a burnt down factory that did not require Jack Welch to be fired. That's not necessarily true about our small manufacturers. Sometimes they're a mistake away from bankruptcy, right? So now the question is, how do we create the environment? And I think this is where we had, right from the beginning, we said, can you create an environment for what we can do controlled experiments? Don't mess with the line. Don't mess with the line. Let the line be. But can we create a little experiment to the side where someone can start playing with some technologies where we do start learning? And can we create this duality? And the second part does require some investment, does require some new thinking. And that's that cultural change that we need to do. So what is sacred stays sacred, but we now create an environment for a little bit of play that we can slowly start incrementally adding in as with the risk mitigation that we need
Right.
back
And
in
with controlled
controlled
risk.
experiments. Right, exactly.
Exactly. All right. So let's pivot now and talk a little bit about operations. What we should be examining and assessing in terms of operation? We talked about culture, and then now we're going to take a look at operations. What should we be looking for there to determine if we have a need for improvement or change?
One of the things it can comes back to the concept I talked about earlier, which is, if you look at your organization, every organization really has just four functions. It doesn't matter how big it is or how small it is: marketing, sales, operations, and finance. And the operations of the entire organization essentially fall into one of these four functions. Now, it may look different in different organizations because sometimes organizations self-complexify, if I may use that word, to become these highly complex, entities. But foundationally, it is attract the customer, consummate the sale, deliver value, and manage your resources. That's
And get
marketing.
paid. And get paid. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's the So then the question becomes, well, how do you measure these? And if you look at it, if you lay this down, the output of marketing is a feeder into sales because marketing generates leads. Leads essentially become orders. Orders become delivered product, and delivered product generates a return on capital, which then feeds your marketing. If you lay your operations out this way, one of the things that becomes very clear is, are your inputs to a particular function feeding the function the way that they should be? I.e., do you have your leading indicators for any given part of your operations being measured, and are they actually being tracked? And leading indicators in one area are typically lagging indicators in the other. So, the leading indicator for sales are leads, but the lagging indicator for marketing is leads. So that's one way. So essentially, if you kind of created the scorecard, that's what I would be looking for: is, do you have the scorecard that defines the flow within your organization, and are you able to take that and really define where are your bottlenecks in the flow? The other thing is, do you understand the difference between externalities and internal controllables? So sometimes what we do is we say, hey, I want, it's a simple thing, right? I want to lose weight. I want to lose weight. And so what I do is I stand on the scale every morning and I see a number. That's a lagging indicator. And all I do is see a number. But there's only two things that can change my weight: diet and exercise. We know that. There's no magic about it. And how do I measure my diet? Right? Well, what am I putting into my body? How do I measure my exercise? So there's two ways to measure exercise. I go to the gym and I can say, is that the value I'm measuring? Or am I actually measuring the number of times I'm actually doing something on the exercise machine? So leading indicators and controllables are what we should be looking for in our operations, having complete understanding of, oh, by the way, we're going to have externalities that are going to be impacting us. In a manufacturing environment, the geopolitical risks are always around us. It's either, it's supply chain shocks, it's tariff issues, it's all these other externalities. And some of these are controllable, some of these are not. What's controllable is, hey, maybe we can hedge it. So say a more sophisticated organization might do forward contracts so that they can lock in the price of a commodity. If I'm a small organization, I don't have that ability because my volumes are not that high. So all I need to do is just be more cognizant. So in operations, I think if you really understand what are the drivers of the business and how my return on capital can be then tracked back to my marketing activity and understanding all the different pieces that are in there, I have a much better understanding of how my company works. That's what we would be looking for in the operations side of the business.
Well, Pavan, could you offer up anything around? So we talked about, culture and people. We talked about, the operations. I'd like to single out supply chain for a sector. Yeah, because you mentioned that briefly. Is there anything in particular we should be evaluating or assessing with respect to supply chain performance? What is it, benchmarking? Is it taking a look at, our ratios for turnover? What should we be assessing to determine if we have a gap there that we need to address with digital transformation techniques?
So I would say that in the area of supply chain, our ability to look deep into the supply chain has been never better than it is today. And I think that we need to do a much better job of that. I think back in the day, maybe, again, pre-COVID, pre-ChatGPT, there was a lot of opacity in the system, and I think some of that has become a lot more transparent. But I think we need to be looking out for those. So, for example, if I am, and I'll just take this out, if I'm a consumer of rare earths, in my product. If you've talked about this, China is the behemoth that is controlled that essentially controls rare earths. The amount of visibility that we have today in the geopolitical landscape as it relates to things like rare earths is so much greater because of the capability of tools like ChatGPT. Now, in the early days of ChatGPT, there was a lot of fear of ChatGPT just making things up. That fear hasn't necessarily gone away, but it has become much better at being able to source arcane references and source, a much wider set of tools. So I would essentially, if I were in a situation where I didn't have the level of insight into a particular area, and we might deal in a traditional organization, we might deal in, you know 50 commodities. I'm just making this up, but only 5 of those are really at risk. I would do a deep dive into, hey, I would set up something in ChatGPT or Perplexity, and an agent that says, anytime you hear something about this particular commodity, send me an alert because I need to know forward looking what's happening in that. That is something that never was accessible to us as leaders before. And, it might give you 10 false warnings, but what'll happen is as we start reading these pieces, we just get a much better understanding of the landscape and we become smarter at the way we kind of look at things. And then on the other piece of supply chain is we haven't talked about additive manufacturing. One of the pieces that we are very excited about is how additive manufacturing can fundamentally transform manufacturing because it converts manufacturing from a more of a process-based discipline to a IP-based discipline, a design-based discipline. So a great example of that is, and there's a company in Iceland. For the life of me, I can't think of their name, but they're a processor of fish. They make fish processing equipment. They're not a processor. They make fish processing equipment. They have redesigned their entire lineup of equipment to be completely additively produced. They have reduced their supply chain risk by essentially double digit percentages because
Well,
now
let me see if I understood what you just said. I think this is pretty important.
yeah,
So, in effect, for a large percentage of the components going into this equipment for fish processing, they're essentially printing the parts we
everything.
need
Yes,
on demand. So they're not like creating tooling and having stuff machined and
correct.
created in a traditional way. They literally
Yes,
p- print the items one at a time for a given machine, put it on there, and away it goes to the customer. So when you talk about collapsing the inventory, the only inventory you got is the raw material, and then you
exactly.
got the actual finished product. So the work in process.
And the raw material tends to be more commoditized,
Right.
and unless it's a I'm not saying every single raw material is easy to find. By no means am I saying that. But if your raw material is more of a traditional metal or metal powder, it's much easier to source than a particular, machined product, which is there. That's how they would basically have these products the sub assemblies they would have to have manufactured internationally. This is an Icelandic company, so they would get most of their product from China. And so they
Right.
were at the mercy of the producers of these components that they would then assemble. So from an assembly operation, they converted themselves essentially to a printing operation. And they essentially now make everything with the raw material primarily being metal. And that's another way to kind of say, hey, how can I always ask the question, how can I mitigate my risk using a completely different manufacturing technology? So that's the second piece of this equation, which is insight and then recrafting and reconfiguration.
Okay. Well, we need to pivot now. You've done a really good job of helping me understand, three key areas we ought to consider, with the workforce, operations, supply chain. Let's pivot now, take a few minutes and talk about, okay, yeah, we got a gap. We need to do something. What would be your advice in terms of what do we go do? I mean, you've shared bits and pieces of that already, but maybe you could kind of encapsulate this too. Here's the key things to take action on: workforce, operations, supply chain. Could you give us a quick drill down on that?
This might actually sound silly, but when I'm faced today with a big, hairy problem, I actually have a conversation with AI. I'm not kidding you. This is actually what's happening. It is all about the questions and the context that you have to give. So before you try to say we have the gap, I would advise every executive to really understand the gap and what is leading up to that gap. And so, we have a personnel, it's kind of like the gentleman who said, you know, I, uh, I think he said it was not even 22. I think it was like 36. I think he said we went through 36 CNC machinists over the last year and a half.
Thanks.
I can't find a CNC machinist. And I said, your problem's not finding CNC machinist. Your problem is understanding why they're leaving. I don't know I don't know why they're leaving. And I would dig into that. So I would say that getting the deepest insight, we are coming to a time where the AI solutioning is so powerful, but it's the context that we give it that is actually sometimes lacking, and it's the context that we need to. So the insight into understanding what it is probably the most important thing. That really understanding back in the day we used to say, RCA, root cause analysis. That is true today as much as it is. It's so we need to kind of do this analysis of why 5 times, and then come down to, okay, well, now that I know this, let's see what my friend ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity says about this. And you'd be surprised at the amount of insight you could get. Now, we don't have a specific problem, but as a generic solution, I am amazed. And by the way, I'm not the only one. Sam Altman, who's the chief of OpenAI, was once asked, "How do you decide what the future of OpenAI should be?" And he said, "I asked ChatGPT." Now he said it, and everybody thought they were laughing. And he said, people laugh when I say that, but he says that the amount of context I have in my mind when I ask that question means that I get a meaningful response because I have given it the rich context in my own environment that someone else would not necessarily. So it's all about context that we can provide, which is then really under having the insight into why do we have this gap in the first place? And I think the bottom line is, if we want to be effective executives in this upcoming era, it's no longer about a cursory, superficial understanding of our business. It is going to have to be a deeper, more insightful, almost visceral understanding to the core understanding of the business and the underlying dynamics that's going to be required.
Yeah, it kind of takes me back to an age-old quote, attributed to Albert Einstein. Now, it goes something like this: "The formulation of the problem is often more essential than the solution."
Yes.
So I don't know if that's the exact quote, but that stuck with me for many years. So what you're advocating here is pretty important, because if we want to leverage technologies and take advantage of AI, for example, what I'm learning very quickly is we have to be very, very skillful at asking the right questions and creating the correct context for what's the real problem we're
Yes.
solving for. And that was a great example, right? We have turnover in our CNC department.
Yes.
Okay, so what's the real problem? You got to peel that back and get down to really understanding the true root cause. So So that was really good. What else from a go-do advice would you offer the audience before we get into wrap up?
So, just feeding onto that, right? So, what am I doing personally? So, what I have determined is, sometimes when we're running our businesses, we don't have time to work on the business. Right? We're in our business, hey, there's a PO that's not being followed up on, or there's this massive receivable from customer, but they're 40% of our, of our revenues. And I can't be too hard on them. And oh, by the way, randomly the CFO calls and said, hey, can you take a 3% haircut because, the tariffs are killing us? And all of these tactical problems I got mired in, right? Is going to become more and more important for our leaders to be able to step back and work on their business, but also work on themselves. And I would say that the way you work on yourself is to really understand, your industry, your positioning in that industry. One resource that started to use is there's a podcast called Acquired that
Okay.
I've been listening to. And these are two guys that do deep dive history, analysis, strategy, dissection on companies. Just absolutely amazing. And it's an investment in my own education. And they call these podcasts conversational audiobooks. That's how they do it. And if there's one that you should be looking at if you're a manufacturer is look at the one on Lockheed Martin. Just a fascinating episode on the struggles of Lockheed as an organization, the history, how they created their skunk works, because all of those learnings are relevant in a manufacturer today. And how Kelly, who was like the chief engineer of Lockheed, ran the skunk works, how he had to kind of navigate through some of the, the political travails at the time. All of this stuff is just fascinating. And I think that as executives, we've got to take time for our own self development. And it's that deeper level two thinking that we have to focus on because the AI is going to be really good at the tactical side of things. But unless you know what to tell it to do, it has no idea what to do. So the it, you are going to be in telling it what to do, the more sophisticated the response. And the way you get there is just becoming a better version of yourself as an executive.
Yeah, it makes me think of a story that somebody told me a while back, and I can't remember the details, but basically, the company was pretty successful. And then they said, wait a minute, let's form a small team and just have this. This was years ago, 10, 15 years ago, right? Before we had the tools and the things we have available now. And they basically said to the team, go in a room and design the company that would put us out of business. Design a business, right? Design a company, a competitor, describe a competitor that would put us out of business.
Yes.
And it was such a light bulb that they ended up creating another whole line of business, which made a huge difference in them sustaining their company. What so I'm just, tying together things that I've picked up over the years. So there is a real opportunity to
Yes.
reinvent,
Yes.
but you have to put yourself out there as a person, right? As an individual, as a leader,
Yeah. And
be
I
open
can
to
say
that.
to you what is fascinating about AI and the power of these AI tools is if you provide the right context, that exercise that this little team did, you can do that in a fraction of the time today with the power of AI. But you've got to be able to ask the right questions. So,
Yeah, and that's the key thing here, right?
yeah.
Back to the Einstein, you gotta formulate
Yes.
the question or the problem to solve
Right.
correctly, because otherwise you're getting led down the garden path, maybe in causing your AI to hallucinate a little bit.
Yes, exactly. It will do. I think it was Tony Robbins who said, ask empowering questions. If you ask a question that says, hey, why am I sick? Why am I fat? Why am I, poor? The universe, you'll get the answer. Well, you don't work at it. You don't, but that's not the useful question. The useful question is, well, knowing what I know now, how can I change that? What can I do? What's a first small step? And now you have some agency in the next step. And now you can say, okay, all right, maybe I won't lift weights, but maybe I can walk on the treadmill for a little bit and just kind of get my, and the next question is, okay, how do I get better at this and better and better and better, right? Instead of keep, asking the question, which is has the logical answer, which is, yeah, because you don't do anything. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Before we wrap up, any last bit of go-do advice you might offer the audience?
In talking with a lot of people, I find sometimes that at least our generation, we're a little intimidated by technology. We don't see ourselves as digital natives. I was fortunate enough to be invited to a church group, and I was so happy to see that a lot of the seniors over there had actually started just using AI. And, I would say that if you're not doing that right now, start doing it. And just, if you don't know where to start, ask it where I should start. And you'll start kind of developing that muscle of being comfortable with the technology, because that's not something, I was, when I was a kid, we were using rotary phones. And I'm sure many of our audience members probably know what a rotary phones is, right? And kids today don't. But that doesn't mean it should be a disadvantage. It's not like you can't teach a dog, an old dog new tricks. It just, if the dog has the right attitude, they'll learn any trick they want, right? So I think that's one of the things that I would just encourage people to do. And the barriers essentially, we don't need to do command line stuff anymore. You can just talk to your AI if you want, if that's more comfortable, and the AI will respond back in speech that is very human like. So I would say that, now start dealing with it in the model or in the mode that is super comfortable. And then, so that's for older people. And for the younger people, I would say, uh, and I don't mean this as a joke, but if you're young, learn how to make a phone call. The next time your car needs some work, call a mechanic and schedule an appointment and explain to them that you need an oil change or you need 4 tires, whatever it is that you need. As much as it's easy to just go online and make the appointment, make a phone call. And that interhuman capability, sometimes we lose that in this day and age. That is going to start becoming very valuable when AI starts doing some of our mundane work, because we're going to have more space for interhuman communication. And if we lose that capability, we're not going to be as good at that. So uh,
We need balance.
yeah, pick up the phone and order a pizza. Don't just order it online, like start doing those basic things, and it'd be kind of, it's different. If you haven't done it, it's not, it's a little intimidating. Yeah. You might be the best prompt engineer on ChatGPT, but, maybe you'd have trouble calling the mechanic and saying, I need an oil change. So I would say those are the two things that I would leave with.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, cool. So, Pavan, this has been great. I've got a couple new wrinkles in my brain here, right? Different ways to think about a couple of things. So, I'm really grateful you were able to join us. If people want to get in touch with you, pick your brain, learn more about Automation Alley or whatever, how do folks get in touch with you?
Yeah, automationalley.com. Easy. Our email addresses are there if they want to send us a note. If not, I'm on LinkedIn as well. And I don't check LinkedIn as frequently, but call Automation Alley's main line, and we're reachable. Well, as long as you're not trying to sell us something, please don't sell us something.
That's funny. That's funny. Well, with that, thank you, Pavan, for joining me for this episode of MetaPod.
Thanks so much, Ron. This is a blast.
All right. So awesome. I hope you enjoyed this episode of MetaPod. Be sure to like MetaPod. Be sure to refer it to your friends if you think this was helpful and gave good insights. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for joining MetaPod. For requests on topics or to ask questions, you can connect with Ron Crabtree 3 ways: via email at metapod@metaexperts.com, via LinkedIn, or by calling him directly at 734-425-1455, extension 103. Lastly, if you love the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. We truly appreciate all your support.